Hello and welcome back to the Crime Folio. It is an honor to have you with us again as we descend into the shadows of the human experience. There exists a unique form of courage, one that demands not a single explosive act of bravery, but a sustained 6-year performance of deception. It is the life of the undercover agenta world where your name, your past, and your very soul are currency, traded for trust in the darkest corners of society. They must breathe the air of criminals, speak their language, and adopt their codes, all while a single misstep could mean a violent, anonymous end. But what happens when the mask begins to fuse with the face? Tonight, we explore for true stories of agents who went so deep into the abyss, they risked never coming back. This is the Undercover Nightmare. Case 1. The Joseph Pistone-Donnie Brasco infiltration. Our story begins not in the smoky backrooms of a social club, but in the sterile, ordered world of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It begins with a man named Joseph D. Pistone. Born in Paterson, New Jersey, Pistone was not a product of the streets he would later inhabit. He was a former teacher, a dedicated family man, and by 1976, a seasoned FBI agent with a particular and rare talent. He possessed an almost preternatural ability for undercover work. He could disappear into a role, his memory for detail and his unshakable nerve allowing him to navigate treacherous criminal landscapes. He had successfully infiltrated truck hijacking rings and stolen heavy equipment gangs. But the FBI had a new, far more ambitious target in mind: La Cosa Nostra, the American Mafia. At the time, the Mafia was a phantom. Its existence was known, its influence felt in the corruption of unions and the violence on the streets, but its inner workings were a fortress. The code of omerta, the vow of silence, was absolute. Law enforcement could only chip away at the edges, arresting low-level soldiers who would rather spend decades in prison than betray the family. To truly damage the organization, the FBI needed to get inside. They needed to place a man not just on the periphery, but in the very heart of a crime family, to live and breathe their world until he became one of them. It was a mission considered by many to be impossible, a suicide assignment. The man they chose for this impossible task was Joe Pistone. Thus, a ghost was born. Joe Pistone, the FBI agent, began to fade away. In his place emerged Donnie Brasco, a small-time but confident jewel thief and fence from Vero Beach, Florida. The persona was meticulously crafted. Brasco was an orphan, a man with no family ties, no history that could be easily checked. He was taught the intricacies of diamond evaluation by real jewelers in New York's Diamond District. He learned the subtle rhythms of street hustling, the language of the wise guy, the delicate dance of respect and intimidation. He was given a driver's license, a social security number, and a backstory that was both plausible and unverifiable. He was no longer Joe Pistone. He was Donnie. The operation, codenamed Sun Apple, began in September of 1976. The initial goal was modest: to infiltrate mid-level fencing and hijacking operations, which the FBI knew were controlled by the 5 families of New York. Brasco began frequenting the bars and social clubs in Manhattan and Brooklyn known to be mob hangouts. For 6 months, he was a ghost in their world, observing, listening, and waiting. He drove a Cadillac, wore sharp suits, and always had a roll of cash. He bought drinks, made small talk, and established himself as a man who knew his business and kept his mouth shut. It was a slow, grueling process of building a reputation from nothing. He was testing the waters, and more importantly, the waters were testing him. Every conversation was a potential trap, every new acquaintance a potential threat. Then, one day in the fall of 1976, the door opened. In a Mulberry Street bar, Brasco struck up a conversation with a member of the Colombo crime family. This led to more introductions, and soon he was working with a crew run by a Colombo capo named Gilly Greca. Brasco proved his worth. He was a good earner, a man who could move stolen goods, from precious gems to truckloads of merchandise, without drawing attention. He was quiet, respectful, and reliable. But the Colombo family was in a state of internal war and disarray. Brasco's handlers at the FBI knew that to get to the core of the mafia, He needed to be with a more stable, more powerful organization. He needed to find a new door. That door would be opened by a man named Benjamin Ruggiero. Lefty Guns, they called him, though he claimed to have killed 26 people. He was more of a weary, perpetually indebted soldier than a fearsome killer. He was a made man in the powerful Bonanno crime family, one of the original 5 families of New York. He was old school, a man who lived and breathed the code of the mafia. Lefty was constantly paranoid, perpetually broke, and deeply cynical, but he carried the weight and authority of his position. Donnie Brasco met Lefty Ruggiero in a bar in 1977. Brasco, ever the cool professional, noticed Lefty admiring his diamond ring. He offered to have it appraised for him. This small gesture, a professional courtesy from one supposed criminal to another, was the key. Lefty was impressed by Donnie's knowledge and his quiet confidence. He saw in Brasco something he lacked. A young, sharp, independent earner who wasn't yet tied to any specific crew. Lefty saw potential. He saw a protege. And for Donnie Brasco, the FBI agent, he saw his way in. Lefty Ruggiero took Donnie under his wing. He vouched for him, introducing him to the hierarchy of the Bonanno family. This was the most critical phase of the infiltration. Donnie had to be accepted not just by Lefty, but by his entire crew and, eventually, by the family's leadership. He was introduced to Lefty's capo, the charismatic and dangerous Dominic "Sonny Black" Napolitano. Sonny Black was everything Lefty wasn't. He was ambitious, intelligent, and commanded absolute respect. Where Lefty was a follower, Sonny Black was a leader. To truly succeed, Donnie would have to earn Sonny Black's trust. Life as Donnie Brasco became a relentless 24/7 performance. He spent his days and nights with Lefty and the crew. They would sit for hours in the Motion Lounge, Sonny Black's headquarters in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, drinking coffee, playing cards, and talking. The conversation was a constant stream of mafia business. Collecting on loan sharking debts, planning scores, settling disputes, and always gossiping about the internal politics of the family. For Pistone, it was the fire hose of intelligence. He was a living microphone in the heart of the enemy. Every night, after leaving the crew, he would rush to a secure location to meet his FBI handler, or if he couldn't, he would meticulously write down every detail he could remember on scraps of paper, which he would pass on later. He recorded names, dates, locations, criminal plots, and the complex web of relationships that held the family together. The psychological pressure was immense. Joe Pistone, the agent, had to recede completely. Donnie Brasco had to react instinctively as a mobster would. If someone showed disrespect, Donnie couldn't analyze the situation. He had to react with immediate, controlled aggression. He had to think like them, talk like them, and, most terrifyingly, begin to feel like them. He absorbed their paranoia, their cynicism, their casual acceptance of violence. He learned the cardinal rules. Never disrespect a made man, never touch another man's wife, and never, ever, cooperate with the law. He was living a lie so profound that the truth began to feel distant, like a memory from another man's life. His relationship with Lefty Ruggiero became deeply complicated. On one level, it was a professional manipulation. On another, it was something uncomfortably close to a genuine friendship. Lefty, a man whose own son was a drug addict who had disappointed him, came to see Donnie as the son he wished he'd had. He trusted Donnie implicitly. He taught him the unwritten rules of their world, how to navigate its treacherous currents. A wise guy is always right, Lefty would tell him. Even when he's wrong, he's right. He would advise Donnie on how to deal with other mobsters, how to handle money, how to stay alive. Lefty loved Donnie Brasco. And Joe Pistone, the agent, had to accept that love, nurture it, and know that one day he would have to betray it completely. This was the central nightmare of his existence. The emotional bond was his greatest tool and his heaviest burden. The agent's life outside the operation evaporated. His wife, Maggie, and their 3 daughters were living in a state of suspended animation. They rarely saw him. When he did come home, he was not the man they knew. He was distant, irritable, and guarded. The stress and the persona of Donnie Brasco were bleeding into his real life. He couldn't just switch it off. The arguments became more frequent, the distance wider. He was losing his family, the very people he was fighting to protect, to the character he was forced to play. The FBI, for security reasons, told him very little about the value of his intelligence. He was operating in a vacuum, with no sense of whether his sacrifice was even worthwhile. He was a man without an identity, caught between two worlds, belonging to neither. Meanwhile, in the world of the Bonanno family, Donnie Brasco's star was rising. He was a phenomenal earner. Under the tutelage of Sonny Black, he helped run numerous lucrative rackets. They had a profitable vending machine operation, ran bookmaking and loan sharking businesses, and engaged in hijackings. Donnie was bringing in hundreds of thousands of dollars for the family. He was no longer just an associate. He was a vital part of Sonny Black's crew. The operation then expanded beyond New York. In 1979, Sonny Black, seeing an opportunity, sent Donnie Brasco to Florida to develop new business. There, Donnie, along with another FBI undercover agent, set up a social club called the King's Court. It was a brilliant move. The club became a magnet for mobsters from New York, looking to escape the winter and expand their operations. It was a perfect intelligence trap. Donnie Brasco was now at the nexus of criminal activity connecting the New York families to Florida. He was meeting capos and soldiers from multiple families, gathering information that crossed state and family lines. But with greater success came greater danger. In Florida, Brasco found himself in the middle of a war. The Bonanno family wanted to muscle in on the territory of a local mobster, Santo Trafficante Jr., the powerful boss of the Tampa crime family. The plan involved a hit. Sonny Black and his crew came down to Florida, and they tasked Donnie with helping to set up the murder of Trafficant's son. Pistone now faced the ultimate test. He had to participate in the planning of a murder. He was able to subtly sabotage the plot, feeding information to his handlers that allowed the FBI to intervene and make arrests that seemed unrelated, thereby preventing the hit without exposing him. He was walking a razor's edge. A single mistake would not only end his life but could also get other agents killed. Back in New York, the Bonanno family itself was fracturing. A violent internal war had erupted between two factions. Sonny Black led a faction loyal to the imprisoned boss, Philip Rusty Rustelli. The other faction was composed of three rival capos: Alphonse, Sonny Red, Indelicato, Philip, Philly Lucky Giacone, and Dominic, Big Trin Trinchera. The tension was escalating towards bloodshed. In the midst of this chaos, Donnie Brasco's loyalty and value had become so absolute that Sonny Black made a decision that would be both the pinnacle of the operation and its death knell. He wanted to propose Donnie Brasco for membership. He wanted to make him. To become a made man in the mafia is to be given a sacred, untouchable status. It also requires a vow of absolute loyalty and, traditionally, participation in a contract killing to prove that loyalty. Donnie Brasco was about to be asked to kill. The FBI was now in an impossible position. Their agent had achieved what no one thought possible. He was on the verge of becoming a made member of a La Cosa Nostra family. The intelligence potential was limitless, but they could not authorize their agent to commit murder. The ethical and legal lines were absolute. Furthermore, the internal war within the Bonanno family was about to explode. Pistone's life was in more danger than ever. If his side lost the war, he would be killed along with the rest of Sonny Black's crew. If his side won, he would be asked to participate in the slaughter of the losers. The moment of truth arrived in May 1981. Sonny Black received an order to come to a meeting, and he was told to bring Donnie with him. But at the last minute, Donnie was told to stay behind. Sonny Black went to the meeting alone. It was a trap, but not for him. It was a setup for the rival three capos. That day, Sonny Black and his crew murdered Sonny Red, Philly Lucky, and Big Trin in the basement of a social club. Sonny Black's faction had won the war. When Sonny Black returned, he found Donnie and told him what had happened. He then gave him the news. "We're going to make you." The call was scheduled. Donnie Brasco was to become a member of the family. He would have to take the oath, and very likely, he would be given a contract demand to seal his new identity in blood. The FBI had no choice. The operation had to end. On July 26, 1981, 6 years after Joe Pistone had ceased to exist, 2 FBI agents walked into the Motion Lounge in Brooklyn. They sat down with Sonny Black Napolitano. The club was tense. Strangers were not welcome. One of the agents looked at Sonny Black and said, "We need to talk to you. It's about Donnie Brasco." Sonny Black was dismissive. He thought they were trying to shake him down. Then the agent slid a photograph across the table. It was a picture of a smiling Joe Pistone, in his FBI uniform, standing next to an official government vehicle. The agent said, "Donnie Brasco is a special agent of the FBI." In that moment, Sonny Black Napolitano's world collapsed. The silence in the room was absolute. His face, as described by those present, went white. It was not just the shock of betrayal. It was the sudden, cold realization of his own death sentence. He had allowed an FBI agent into the heart of the family. He had vouched for him, protected him, and loved him like a brother. By the unbreakable code of Omerta, there was only one punishment for such a failure. He had broken the sacred trust. He had disgraced the family. He had to die. For Joe Pistone, the end was just as abrupt. His handlers told him, "It's over. Go home." After 6 years of living in the shadows, it was finished. He went back to a family he barely knew, a man haunted by a ghost he had created. The transition was brutal. He couldn't decompress. He was paranoid, angry, and found it impossible to relate to the normal world. For months, he carried a gun everywhere, sleeping with it by his bed, unable to shed the survival instincts of Donnie Brasco. The consequences of his infiltration were seismic. The information Pistone gathered led to over 200 indictments and over 100 convictions of mafia members, crippling the Bonanno family and severely damaging the Colombo family as well. His testimony in open court was devastating. He sat on the stand, and one by one, the men he had lived with, eaten with, and plotted with saw for the first time that their trusted friend Donnie was a federal agent. The mafia's reputation for invincibility was shattered, but the personal cost was immense. A $500,000 contract was placed on his life. Joe Pistone and his family were forced into a permanent form of witness protection, living under an assumed name, constantly moving, forever looking over their shoulders. And what of the men he left behind? Dominic "Sonny" Black Napolitano knew his fate was sealed. On August 17, 1981, less than a month after the revelation, he was called to a meeting. Before he left, he gave his favorite pigeons to a friend to look after, and left his jewelry and the keys to his apartment behind. He knew he wasn't coming back. He walked to his death with the grim acceptance of a man bound by a code. His body was found a year later in a body bag in Staten Island. He had been shot to death. His hands had been cut off, a traditional mafia message to someone who had introduced a traitor into the family. Benjamin "Lefty" Ruggiero was arrested by the FBI before the mob could get to him. He was picked up on a federal warrant, an act that likely saved his life. When he was told that his protege, the man he treated like a son, was an FBI agent, he was incredulous. "I don't believe it," he said over and over. The betrayal was too profound to comprehend. He was tried and sentenced to 15 years in prison. He refused to believe the truth about Donnie until Pistone himself testified in court. Lefty was eventually released due to terminal cancer and died in 1994. A broken man, a relic of a world that had been irrevocably exposed by the man he once loved. The story of Joseph Pistone is a testament to incredible bravery and sacrifice. But it is also a profound meditation on the nature of identity. For 6 years, he lived a lie so completely that it nearly consumed him. He destroyed a criminal enterprise, but in doing so, he had to betray a form of trust, however perverse and violent its context. Joseph Pistone, the agent, survived, but he is forever bound to the ghost of Donnie Brasco, the man who went into the dark and brought back the truth, but left a part of himself behind. The nightmare for him was not just the constant threat of death, but the quiet, gnawing reality that to destroy the monster, he had to become one. K02 the Kiki Camarena story. If Joseph Pistone's nightmare was a slow descent into a psychological labyrinth, our next story is a plunge into a sun-bleached hell. We move from the cloistered, coded world of the New York Mafia to the sprawling, lawless empire of the Mexican drug trade in the early 1980s. This is not a story of infiltration in the same vein, for the agent here did not wear a mask. His name was known to the enemy. The nightmare was not in pretending to be a monster, but in staring the monster in its face, day after day, in a land where the monster wore a badge, held political office, and controlled everything the light touched. This is the story of Enrique Kiki Camarena and the price of drawing a line in the sand. Enrique Camarena was born in Mexicali, Mexico, but raised in Calexico, California. He was a man of two worlds, uniquely positioned to understand the border and the corrupting flow of narcotics across it. After serving in the Marine Corps, he became a police officer and then, in 1974, joined the Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA. He was driven, relentless, and possessed a quiet, unshakable belief in his mission. He was a family man, devoted to his wife, Mika, and their 3 young sons. In 1980, he turned down a safer posting in Miami for a transfer to the DEA's resident office in Guadalajara, Mexico. At the time, Guadalajara was the epicenter of a new and terrifying phenomenon: the Guadalajara cartel. Unlike the traditional, hierarchical mafia families, the Guadalajara cartel was a federation, a powerful syndicate of Mexico's top drug traffickers, chief among them Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo, known as El Padrino, the Godfather, Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo, Don Neto, and the volatile, immensely wealthy Rafael Caro Quintero. They were not merely criminals. They were titans of industry. They had pioneered the cultivation of high-grade sinsemilla marijuana on an industrial scale and were building the cocaine corridors that would soon flood the United States. Their power did not just come from guns. It came from money. They bought politicians, police commanders, and intelligence officials. The Mexican Federal Security Directorate, the DFS, was not an adversary. It was their private security force. Into this viper's nest walked Kiki Camarena in 1981. He understood the danger, but he also saw the necessity. He famously told his mother, "I'm only one person, but I want to make a difference." From the moment he arrived, he was confronted with a level of corruption that was breathtaking in its scope. It was a suffocating, omniscient presence. Every attempt at an operation was met with frustration. Raids on drug labs would be meticulously planned, only for the agents to arrive at an empty, freshly cleaned building. Tips would be given to trusted police counterparts, and hours later the targets would vanish. Witnesses would agree to talk, and then they would be found dead, or simply disappear forever. Camarena and his small team of fellow agents were operating on a hostile island. They were isolated, under-resourced, and surrounded by supposed allies who were secretly on the cartel's payroll. Trust was a currency more valuable than gold, and infinitely rarer. Kiki's great strength was his ability to cultivate human intelligence. He refused to be chained to a desk. He worked the streets, developing a network of informants, paying for scraps of information, slowly, painstakingly piecing together the true scale of the cartel's operations. He was a phantom threat to them, a man who refused to be bought, intimidated, or discouraged. He was digging, and the cartel knew it. They just didn't know how deep he was digging. His focus became the cartel's greatest source of wealth: their vast, hidden marijuana plantations. These were not backyard plots. These were sophisticated agricultural enterprises, sprawling across thousands of acres of remote desert, employing thousands of impoverished laborers who were little more than indentured servants. Through his network, Kiki began to hear whispers of a single, colossal operation, a place that was the heart of the cartel's marijuana empire, personally run by Rafael Caro Quintero. It was called Rancho Buffalo. For months, Kiki worked to pinpoint its location. He gathered intelligence from informants, cross-referenced it with aerial reconnaissance, and slowly built a case file so detailed and undeniable that it could not be ignored. He learned that Rancho Buffalo, located in the state of Chihuahua, was more than a farm. It was a self-sufficient city. It spanned over 2,500 acres, with its own dormitories, cafeterias, and security. It was a monument to the cartel's arrogance and power, a symbol of their belief that they were untouchable. Kiki's intelligence was, as one colleague later described it, too good. He had found the monster's heart. In November 1984, acting on the precise intelligence provided by Camarena, the Mexican army, accompanied by DEA agents, descended on Rancho Buffalo. The scale of what they found was staggering. Between 8,000 and 10,000 tons of high-grade marijuana were seized and destroyed in massive bonfires that burned for days. The estimated street value was over $2.5 billion in today's money. It was the largest drug bust in history, a catastrophic financial blow to the Guadalajara cartel. The success of the raid was also Kiki Camarena's death sentence. Rafael Caro Quintero was incandescent with rage. He had lost a fortune, but more than that, he had lost face. He had been profoundly humiliated. He and the other cartel leaders knew with absolute certainty that this level of precise intelligence could have only come from one place: the persistent, meddling DEA agent in Guadalajara. They knew his name, Enrique Camarena. They decided that an example had to be made. They were not just going to kill him. They were going to send a message so brutal, so horrific, that no American agent would ever dare to cross them again. The DEA was aware of the increased danger. Camarena was scheduled to be transferred to a new post in just 3 weeks. He was counting the days. He knew he was a marked man. He started carrying a gun and varied his routes to and from the office. But in a city where the police were the enemy's soldiers, such precautions were futile. On February 7, 1985, at around 2 p.m., Kiki Camarena left the American consulate in Guadalajara. He was on his way to meet his wife, Mika, for lunch. As he walked toward his truck, a Volkswagen sedan pulled up. 4 men got out. They were not masked thugs from a dark alley. They flashed badges. They were, or appeared to be, police officers. In broad daylight, on a busy street, they surrounded him. There was no struggle. In a world where police authority was absolute, he likely thought it was a shakedown or a misunderstanding. They pushed him into the car and sped away. At almost the same time, his pilot and informant, Alfredo Zavala Avalar, was abducted in a separate incident. The cartel was tying up loose ends. Kiki Camarena was taken to a luxurious villa at 881 Lope de Vega Street, a house owned by Caro Quintero. What happened next is known to us through the cold, forensic evidence of an autopsy report and the chilling, inhuman evidence of audio tapes. For the cartel leaders were so arrogant, so certain of their impunity, that they recorded parts of their work. For more than 30 hours, Kiki Camarena was systematically tortured. This was not an act of random, frenzied violence. It was a clinical, cold-blooded interrogation. Caro Quintero, Don Neto, and other high-level traffickers were present, their voices later identified on the tapes. They wanted to know what he knew. They asked him about DEA informants, about ongoing investigations, about the intelligence that led to the Rancho Buffalo raid. With each answer they deemed insufficient, the torture intensified. His skull was fractured with a piece of rebar. His jaw was broken. His nose was crushed. His ribs were shattered. A drill was used to bore a hole into his head. To ensure the interrogation could continue for as long as possible, they had a doctor on hand, Humberto Alvarez McCain. His job was to inject Kiki with drugs, including lidocaine and amphetamines, to keep his heart beating and to keep him conscious through the waves of unimaginable pain. He was being kept alive only to suffer more. The recordings capture his muffled groans and his strained, defiant voice as he refused to betray his country or his sources. After 36 hours, when his body was finally broken beyond repair, he was killed. The official cause of death was a blow to the head with a blunt object that crushed his skull. The initial response to his disappearance was chaotic. The DEA was frantic, but the U.S. government was slow to grasp the gravity of the situation. The Mexican government, meanwhile, began a masterclass in deception and obstruction. They feigned cooperation while actively protecting the killers. Evidence was destroyed. Witnesses were intimidated. The investigation was deliberately sent on wild goose chases. The house on Lope de Vega Street, the site of the torture, was left unguarded for days, allowing the cartel to clean it completely, removing all traces of blood and evidence before the Mexican authorities officially searched it. The DEA, enraged by the betrayal, launched its own investigation, codenamed Operation Leyenda, or Legend. It became the largest and most complex homicide investigation in the agency's history. It was no longer just about drugs. It was about justice. It was a sacred duty. DEA agents from all over the world flooded into Mexico, operating with a cold, relentless fury. They trusted no one. They bypassed official channels, cultivated their own sources, and put immense pressure on Washington to hold the Mexican government accountable. For almost a month, there was no sign of Kiki or Zavala. Then, on March 5, 1985, the bodies were found. A farm worker, walking along a remote roadside in the neighboring state of Michoacán, discovered 2 plastic bags. Inside were the remains of Enrique Camarena and Alfredo Zavala Avelar. Kiki's body was so badly decomposed and mutilated that initial identification was difficult. The autopsy, conducted in the United States, laid bare the full, sickening scope of the torture he had endured. It galvanized the U.S. government into action. The border was nearly closed, putting crippling economic pressure on Mexico. The message was clear. There would be no business as usual until the killers were brought to justice. The fallout was immense. Under a global spotlight, the facade of the Mexican government crumbled. One by one, the leaders of the Guadalajara cartel were hunted down. Rafael Caro Quintero and Ernesto Don Neto Fonseca were arrested in April 1985. Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo, El Padrino, the chief architect of the empire, managed to evade capture for 4 more years, but he too was finally arrested in 1989. The investigation, Operation Leyenda, would go on for years, eventually indicting dozens of individuals, including high-ranking officials in the Mexican government and police who were complicit in the murder. The Guadalajara cartel, once the most powerful criminal organization in the world, was shattered. Kiki Camarena's death was a nightmare that sent shockwaves through the world of law enforcement. But his story does not end in that dark room on Lope de Vega Street. His sacrifice fundamentally and permanently changed the DEA. It forged an unbreakable sense of solidarity, a solemn vow that no agent would ever be left behind, and that any attack on one of them would be met with the full, unwavering force of the entire agency. The phrase, "Remember the Kika," became a sacred creed. But his legacy extends far beyond the agency he served. In his hometown of Calexico, a wave of grief and anger gave rise to a powerful community movement. People wore red ribbons to honor his memory and to symbolize their pledge to live drug-free lives. This grassroots effort grew, spreading from town to town, state to state, until it became the National Red Ribbon Week, the largest drug abuse prevention campaign in the United States. Enrique Camarena went to Guadalajara to make a difference. He faced down a corrupt and violent empire with little more than his own courage and conviction. In the end, they took his life in the most brutal way imaginable. But they could not extinguish what he stood for. The nightmare of his death gave birth to a symbol of hope and a movement that has educated millions. His ultimate sacrifice served as a terrifying warning about the depths of narco-state corruption, but it also became a lasting testament to the profound impact that one person, armed with unshakable purpose, can have on the world. Case 3. The infiltration of the Hells Angels. The darkness of the human soul manifests in many forms. For the Mafia, it was a shadowed world of whispers, codes, and tradition. For the cartels, a sun-scorched empire of brazen corruption and narco-terrorism. Our next story takes us into a different tribe, one that wears its lawlessness as a badge of honor, stitched onto the back of a leather vest. This is the world of the one-percenters, the outlaw motorcycle gangs. And at the pinnacle of this world, shrouded in mythology and feared for their capacity for brutal violence, sit the Hells Angels. To infiltrate this brotherhood is not like infiltrating the Mafia. There is no quiet observation from the corner of a social club. The Hence Angels are a visceral, physical culture. Entry is not earned through earning potential or quiet respect. It is forged in violence, baptized in blood, and sealed with a loyalty so absolute it borders on the religious. You cannot pretend to be a Hell's Angel. You must become one. And the man who would attempt this transformation was, in many ways, perfectly and dangerously suited for the role. His name was J. Dobbins. Dobbins was not a subtle man. A special agent with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives, ATF. He was a former college football star from the University of Arizona, a wide receiver who thrived on adrenaline and confrontation. He was big, loud, and pathologically competitive. Where Joseph Pistone was a chameleon, adapting to his surroundings, J. Dobbins was a battering ram, built to smash through walls. He was drawn to the most dangerous assignments, the ones others shied away from. And in 2001, the ATF had the most dangerous assignment imaginable, Operation Black Biscuit. The goal was to infiltrate the Mesa, Arizona chapter of the Hells Angels, a notoriously violent sect within the organization. But the ATF wanted more than just an informant. They wanted to build a federal case under the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations, RICO Act, the same powerful tool used to dismantle the mafia. To do that, they needed an agent to become a full-patch member, to be accepted into the inner sanctum, to witness and participate in the criminal conspiracy from the inside. Thus, J. Dobbins, the federal agent, began to die, and J. Jaybird Davis was born. The creation of Jaybird was a masterpiece of criminal theater. Dobbins shed his agent's persona and physically transformed. He grew his hair long, cultivated a scruffy beard, and covered his muscular frame in tattoosome real, some painstakingly applied fakes that told a story of a life lived on the wrong side of the law. His backstory was a cocktail of plausible criminality. He was a gun runner, a debt collector, a hard man from a crew in Nevada, now on the run. He had a cover story, a fake criminal record, and a network of other undercover agents playing his crew, ready to vouch for him. Most importantly, he had a Harley-Davidson motorcycle and the attitude to ride it. He was not playing a role. He was unleashing a darker, more primal version of himself. The Hells Angels do not simply open their doors to new applicants. You don't get in by asking. You get in by being noticed. Jaybird and his undercover crew set up their own fake motorcycle gang, the Solo Angels, and began operating on the periphery of the Hells Angels world. They picked fights, they were flashy with their money, they talked tough. They were making noise, deliberately positioning themselves as a crew that was either a threat or a potential asset. They were baiting the hook. The Hells Angels noticed. The test came quickly. The Angels, suspicious of this new crew, wanted to know if Jaybird was for real. They needed proof. The ATF and Dobbins devised a plan of shocking audacity. To prove his bona fides as a killer, Jaybird would murder a member of the Mongols, the Hells Angels' most hated rivals. The scene was meticulously staged. Another undercover agent played the role of the Mongol. They met in a desolate cemetery, the supposed location of a gun deal. The Hells Angels were watching from a distance. On cue, a fake argument erupted. Dobbins, as Jaybird, pulled a gun and shot the Mongol agent, who was rigged with squibs and blood packs. As the agent fell, Jaybird stood over him and fired again. A cold-blooded execution. He then dragged the body to a car and, with another undercover officer, drove away to dispose of it. The Hells Angels watching were convinced. Jaybird wasn't just a talker. He was a killer. He had proven he was willing to shed the blood of their enemy. The door to their world creaked open. Jaybird was invited to hang around the Hells Angels Mesa clubhouse. This was the beginning of the grueling phase known as prospecting. Being a prospect, or probie, is to be the lowest form of life in the club. It is a 24/7 ordeal of humiliation and testing. Jaybird was no longer the leader of his own crew. He was an errand boy. He guarded the bikes of full-patch members, a task of sacred importance. He cleaned the clubhouse, fetched drinks, and stood as security. He was expected to be available at any moment, day or night, to do anything a member asked of him. But the most important tests were of his capacity for violence. The Hells Angels live by a code of instant and overwhelming retaliation to any perceived slight. If another biker in a bar so much as looked at a member the wrong way, Jaybird was expected to be the first one to throw a punch, the first to break a bottle over a head. He could not hesitate. He could not think like a cop, weighing the consequences. He had to think like an angel, reacting with pure animal aggression. He engaged in numerous brawls, collecting debts for the club, acting as muscle. Each act of violence was an investment in his credibility. Each drop of blood, his own or someone else's, was a down payment on their trust. Slowly, over 21 months, he began to earn it. The lines between J. Dobbins and Jaybird started to blur in dangerous, unpredictable ways. The constant immersion in that world began to change him. He spent his days and nights surrounded by men who lived by a simple, brutal code of honor, loyalty, and violence. He rode with them, drank with them, and fought alongside them. He found himself developing a strange, troubling respect for them. They were criminals, yes, but they were also brothers to each other. They would die for one another without a second's thought. And they were beginning to accept him as one of their own. He formed a bond with a particular member, a man who became his sponsor in the club. They shared stories, confided in each other. This was the deep, insidious nightmare of the assignment. The relationships felt real. The camaraderie, forged in shared danger, was genuine. And Dobbins knew that every friendly gesture, every shared beer, every moment of brotherhood was a calculated part of a grand betrayal he was orchestrating. He was their friend, their brother-in-arms, and he was there to destroy their lives. The guilt was a physical weight, a constant poison. The psychological toll was immense. Dobbins, the agent, was disappearing. Jaybird was taking over. The rage required for the role was no longer an act. He found himself enjoying the adrenaline, the power that came with the Hells Angels vest. He became more volatile, more aggressive, even when he was away from the club. His handlers at the ATF grew concerned. He was becoming one of them. The purpose of the mission, the line between right and wrong, was becoming hazy. This transformation bled into his home life, creating a private hell for his family. His wife and children barely recognized the man who occasionally came home. He was a stranger, paranoid and seething with a rage he couldn't switch off. He would check the house for bombs, sleep with a gun, and react to the slightest noise as if it were a threat. He was bringing the war home. His marriage was crumbling under the strain. His children were terrified of him. He was undercover in his own home, playing the role of husband and father, but the mask of Jaybird was fusing to his skin. He was winning the battle for the soul of the Hells Angels, but losing the battle for his own. The climax of the operation came in the summer of 2003. After nearly 2 years of proving his loyalty, after countless beatings and brawls, after faking a murder and becoming a trusted enforcer, the Mesa chapter of the Hells Angels took a vote. They unanimously agreed to make Jaybird Davis a full-patch member. The ceremony was a solemn, almost religious affair. He was brought before the club, and they presented him with his patches, the sacred, 3-piece insignia of the Hells Angels, featuring the iconic Death's Head skull. To receive the patch is the highest honor. It means you are a brother for life. It means you are family. As they stitched the patch onto his vest, Dobbins felt a sickening mix of triumph and profound self-loathing. He had done it. He had achieved the impossible. He had become a Hells Angel. And in that very moment, he was cementing his betrayal of the men who were now embracing him as a brother. With full membership, Dobbins had complete access. He was privy to the club's deepest secrets, their drug running, their extortion rackets, their plans for war against their rivals. He was a walking, talking RICO case. The ATF had everything they needed. Operation Black Biscuit was ready to come to a close. The takedown was a massive, coordinated event. SWAT teams across multiple states moved in simultaneously to raid Hells Angels clubhouses and homes, arresting dozens of members and associates. Dobbins's role was to help lure some of his brothers to a location where they could be arrested. It was his final act of treachery. The immediate aftermath was seen as a major victory for the ATF. They had cracked the uncrackable. But the celebration was short-lived. The court cases that followed were a disaster. The Hells Angels mounted a brilliant legal defense, portraying themselves as a misunderstood fraternity persecuted by an overzealous government. They attacked Dobbins's credibility on the stand, painting him as a violent rogue agent who had entrapped them. Juries were swayed. Key charges were dropped. Many of the arrested bikers walked free. The monumental personal sacrifice Dobbins had made seemed to result in a hollow, frustratingly incomplete victory. But for J. Dobbins, the nightmare was just beginning. The operation was over, but the war was not. The Hells Angels, feeling betrayed on a level they had never experienced, declared a blood feud. They put a contract on his life. This wasn't a quiet mafia contract to be carried out by a professional hitman. This was a personal vendetta by a global organization with thousands of members, all of whom now knew his name, his face, and the fact that he had a family. The threats were constant and brutally specific. They came via phone calls, letters, and online posts. They described what they would do to his wife and children. His life became a prison of paranoia. He was retired from undercover work, but he could never be a civilian. He lived in a state of high alert, his family effectively under house arrest, their lives dictated by the threat of the men he had betrayed. Then, on a hot August night in 2008, the threat became horrifyingly real. While his wife and 2 children slept, an arsonist crept up to their Tucson home, doused the back porch in gasoline, and set it ablaze. The family awoke to a wall of fire and thick, choking smoke. They barely escaped with their lives, crawling through the smoke-filled house to safety as the back of their home was engulfed in flames. The fire was the ultimate act of terror. The message was clear: we know where you are. We can get to you. We can get to your family. The very people he had sought to protect by taking on this mission were now targets because of it. But the nightmare had one final, cruel twist. In the wake of the arson attack, Dobbins felt abandoned. He accused the ATF, the very agency he had nearly given his life for, of failing to adequately investigate the fire and, more broadly, of failing to protect him and his family after the operation concluded. He claimed they had downplayed the threats against him and left him exposed. The man who had battled the Hells Angels now found himself in a bitter, protracted legal battle with his own government. He sued the ATF, alleging they had breached their duty to him. It was a stunning final act of a tragedy. The warrior, hunted by his enemies, now turning to fight the commanders who sent him into battle. The story of J. Dobbins is a terrifying cautionary tale about the price of going too deep. He was the perfect agent for an impossible mission, a man whose own aggressive nature allowed him to mirror the enemy perfectly. He succeeded in becoming a Hells Angel, a feat of unprecedented undercover work. But the persona he created, the violent and loyal Jaybird, left an indelible scar on the man he used to be. He defeated his enemies in the field, only to find the war followed him home, waged not only by the criminals he betrayed but, in his eyes, by the institution he served. J. Dobbins went into the belly of the beast and came out alive, but he never truly came out free. He remains a man at war, a living ghost haunted by the brotherhood he joined and destroyed. Case 4. The Robert Mazur Infiltrator Case. If the world of J. Dobbins was one of grease, leather, and visceral, explosive violence, our final journey takes us to the other side of the criminal spectrum. Here, the nightmare is not found in the grimy clubhouse of a biker gang, but in the polished marble lobbies of international banks and the hushed, opulent boardrooms where empires of death are financed. The weapon of choice is not a shotgun, but a wire transfer. The uniform is not a patched-up vest, but a tailored silk suit. This is the story of an agent who did not infiltrate a gang, but the very circulatory system of global crime, a world where the sums were so vast they defied comprehension, and the penalty for a single mistake was just as final. This is the story of Robert Mazur and the persona he became, Bob Musella, money launderer to the Medellin cartel. In the mid-1980s, the United States was drowning in cocaine, and the source of that flood was Pablo Escobar's Medellin cartel in Colombia. It was the most powerful, wealthy, and violent criminal organization the world had ever seen. But their greatest strength was also their greatest logistical problem: cash. They were earning money faster than they could count it, let alone spend it. Warehouses were filled with mountains of $100 bills, rotting, eaten by rats, simply because there was too much of it. To turn this raw, dirty cash into usable, legitimate assets, they needed a sophisticated global network of money launderers. The U.S. government knew that to kill the cartel, they had to stop the flow of its blood, which was money. Robert Mazur was a special agent for U.S. Customs. Unlike J. Dobbins, he was not a physical brawler. He was quiet, meticulous, and analytical, a man who understood the intricate dance of international finance. He was an expert in a form of crime that was cerebral, complex, and, in its own way, more insidious than street-level violence. The plan he and his superiors devised, codenamed Operation Seachase, was breathtaking in its ambition. They would not just try to catch a few low-level money movers. They would create their own money laundering organization from scratch, run by an undercover agent, to attract the biggest clients in the world, including the Medellin cartel itself. Thus, Robert Mazur, the dedicated civil servant and family man, was put on a shelf. In his place walked Robert Musella. Bob Musella was everything Mazur was not. He was a flamboyant, high-rolling, mob-connected financial consultant from New Jersey. He had a backstory of vague but menacing connections to the Gambino crime family, giving him an aura of untouchable power. He owned a private jet, wore Rolex watches, and drove a Rolls-Royce. He frequented the most expensive restaurants, stayed in the most luxurious hotels, and always paid in cash. He was building a legend, creating a character so wealthy and so corrupt that the real criminals would come to him, seeking his expertise. The operation began small. Mazur, as Musella, used an informant to make his first connections. He started laundering small amounts of cash, a few $100,000 at a time, for mid-level drug traffickers. But he did it with a professionalism and sophistication that got him noticed. He didn't just move cash in suitcases. He set up shell corporations, manipulated invoices for phony businesses, and moved money through a dizzying maze of international banks. He was offering a boutique white-glove service for cleaning dirty money. Every transaction was a test. The numbers had to be perfect. The paperwork had to be flawless. The story had to be unshakable. In this world, a mathematical error or a slip of the tongue about banking regulations would be as fatal as a bullet. His reputation grew. The whispers in the underworld spoke of a new player, Bob Musella, a man who could wash millions without a trace. Soon, he was introduced to a man named Gonzalo Mora Jr., a key operative in the Medellin cartel's financial wing. Mora tested Musella, vetting him, feeling him out. Musella passed every test. He was calm, confident, and he understood their needs. He was a businessman just like them. The door to the inner circle was opening. Through Mora, Musella was finally introduced to the man who would become the centerpiece of the entire operation, Roberto Elcano. Elcano was not a thuggish enforcer. He was one of Pablo Escobar's most trusted and brilliant lieutenants, a man responsible for managing the movement of hundreds of millions of dollars. He was sophisticated, charming, intelligent, and a devoted family man. He lived in a stunning mansion in a wealthy suburb, hosted elegant dinner parties, and doted on his wife and children. He was also a direct link to the man responsible for the murder of thousands. This was the beginning of the true psychological nightmare for Robert Mazur. To succeed, Bob Musella had to become Roberto Elcano's friend, his trusted confidant. They began to do business, laundering millions of dollars of Escobar's cocaine money. But their relationship quickly transcended business. Elcano genuinely liked Musella. He invited him into his home, introduced him to his family. They would sit by Elcano's pool, drinking fine wine, talking about their children, their wives, their hopes for the future. Mazur found himself in a surreal moral vortex. He was developing a genuine rapport with a man whose work facilitated unimaginable suffering. He saw the loving father, the charming host, the loyal friend. and he had to reconcile that with the knowledge that this man was a key component in a machine of murder and addiction. The duality was tearing Mazur apart. He would spend his days as the decadent Bob Musella, flying in private jets and discussing multi-million-dollar deals with narco-traffickers. He would spend his nights in anonymous hotel rooms, hunched over a tape recorder, documenting every detail for the investigation, the weight of his profound deception pressing down on him. He was living a lie so complete that the real world, his own family, began to feel like a distant dream. To make the persona of Bob Musella even more convincing, the operation introduced a new character, his fiancée. Fellow undercover agent Kathy Ertz was cast as Kathy Erickson, Musella's beautiful and equally sharp partner. She added a layer of stability and normalcy to Musella's persona, making him seem less like a lone wolf and more like a man building a life, an empire. She was his rock, both in the undercover world and in reality, the one person he could speak to without a mask, the only one who truly understood the pressure he was under. Together, they navigated the treacherous social landscape of the cartel, attending parties, dinners, and building the trust that was so essential to the operation. As Mazur dug deeper, he and his team uncovered something far more sprawling than they had ever imagined. The cartel's money wasn't just being laundered by a few corrupt individuals. It was being systematically processed by a major global financial institution, the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, or BCCI. BCCI was no ordinary bank. It was a shadow empire, a multi-billion-dollar entity with branches in over 70 countries. And it was, as investigators would later call it, a bank for criminals. They serviced the accounts of dictators like Saddam Hussein, corrupt politicians, arms dealers, and, as Mazur was discovering firsthand, the world's largest drug cartels. The bankers at BCCI weren't just complicit. They were active, eager partners, creating sophisticated schemes to hide the illicit origins of their clients' fortunes. Operation Sea Chase had stumbled out of the underworld and into one of the biggest financial scandals in history. The operation had reached a critical mass. Mazur had the cartel's hierarchy, he had their methods, and now he had their bank. It was time to pull in the net. But how do you arrest dozens of high-level, paranoid criminals scattered across the globe? A series of simultaneous raids would be complex and risky. They needed a single event, a single location where they could gather all the key players. The idea, born of the very deception they had perfected, was genius in its audacity and cruelty. Bob Musella and Kathy Erickson would get married. It was the perfect trap. A wedding is a celebration of trust, friendship, and family. Musella would invite all of his friends and business associates, the cartel launderers, the corrupt bankers, the key players from 2 years of deep undercover work to a lavish celebration in Tampa, Florida. It was an invitation they couldn't refuse. To decline would be a sign of disrespect to their trusted partner. The preparations for the fake wedding were as meticulous as any real one, but the details were surreal. The guest list was a rogues gallery of international criminals. The caterers and wedding planners were FBI and customs agents. The stretch limousines that would pick up the guests from the airport were wired for sound and driven by agents. The bachelor party, held at a local steakhouse, was swarming with undercover officers, capturing every drunken boast and criminal confession on hidden microphones. The day of the wedding, in October 1988, was the culmination of 2 years of unrelenting pressure. Robert Mazur and Kathy Ertz, dressed in a tuxedo and a wedding gown, stood in a luxury hotel, greeting their guests. One by one, the targets arrived. Roberto Alcano was there, beaming, happy to celebrate his friend's special day. The corrupt bankers from BCCI flew in from around the world. High-level cartel lieutenants arrived, bearing expensive gifts. They embraced Musella, congratulated Kathy, and mingled, drinking champagne, completely unaware that they were at their own indictment. Mazur described the feeling as pure, terrifying adrenaline. He had to play the role of the happy, slightly drunk groom, all while coordinating the final moves of the sting operation with agents posing as hotel staff. He looked out at the assembled crowd, a room full of men he had befriended, men whose trust he had cultivated, and knew that in a few moments he would be responsible for destroying their lives. The betrayal was absolute. The signal was given. Dozens of federal agents, who had been posing as waiters, busboys, and guests, suddenly drew their weapons. The doors were sealed. An agent stepped to the microphone and announced, "This is a raid by U.S. Customs. You are all under arrest." The confusion in the room turned to shock, then to rage and disbelief. But the most poignant moment was between Mazur and Alcano. As agents swarmed him, Alcano looked at his friend, Bob Musella, his face a mask of utter betrayal. He didn't say a word. The look in his eyes was all that was needed. It was the look of a man whose world had just been completely and irrevocably shattered by someone he trusted as a brother. Operation Sea Chase was an unprecedented success. It led to the indictment of more than 85 individuals, from Pablo Escobar's inner circle to the highest echelons of BCCI. The evidence gathered by Mazur was so overwhelming that it triggered a global investigation into BCCI, exposing its systemic corruption and leading to its eventual collapse in 1991. It was the largest money laundering prosecution in U.S. history and dealt a devastating blow to the financial infrastructure of the Medellin cartel. But for Robert Mazur, the victory came at an astronomical personal price. The operation was over, but his life as Robert Mazur was also over. He immediately received a credible death threat from the enraged cartel, a contract on his life that has never been rescinded. He was forced into immediate retirement and has lived in hiding ever since, under a new identity, forever looking over his shoulder. He can never go back to the man he was. Bob Musella, the ghost he created, now dictates the terms of his existence. The nightmare of Robert Mazur's infiltration lies in its quiet, corporate setting. It reveals a truth more chilling than any street-level violence, that the greatest evils are often enabled not by thugs in alleys, but by men in suits in boardrooms. He walked a tightrope of deception where the fall was a quiet death in a foreign land or a lifetime of looking over his shoulder. He befriended his enemy and used that friendship as a weapon, a necessary betrayal that saved countless lives but cost him his own. Robert Mazur proved that the heart of darkness can be found not just in a jungle or a clubhouse, but behind the gleaming facade of a respectable bank. For men, for masks, for journeys into the abyss. From the coded honor of the mafia to the sun-bleached savagery of the cartels. From the violent brotherhood of a biker gang to the cold corporate corruption of global finance. Each agent was asked to surrender their identity, to become a convincing monster in order to fight a real one. They walked a razor's edge, where one false step meant death, and success meant a lifetime of grappling with the ghosts of their deception. Their stories are a testament to unimaginable courage, but also a solemn reminder of the true cost of justice. The nightmare is not always what they faced in the darkness, but what they brought back with them into the light. And now, as we leave these shadows behind and return to the quiet of our own worlds, we hope our stories have offered not fear, but a deeper understanding. Sleep well.